Hello and welcome to Algebra 2 tutorial. We're continuing our journey here through solving quadratic equations. And we've done two of these topics already, square roots and factoring. It's time for our third one, completing the square. First, I want to show you why we need completing the square. And it starts with factoring. There's a problem with factoring. So let's make up a problem here. If I just pick some random numbers here to put in here, like 2, 5, and 6 for our quadratic equation. Well, then I would do 2 times 6 to give me 12, and I would have to find ones that add up to be 5. So my options are 1 and 12, 2 and 6, and 3 and 4. And what you realize that no combination of positives or negatives will ever get me to 5. Well, that just means we can't factor. And so we're out of luck. Factoring does not work. But we do want to try to solve this type of quadratic equation. So we need more options. Our next option to do that for equations that cannot be factored is called completing the square. What I like to call force factoring. We're going to force these to factor even though they don't. Now, to show you how this works, I want to start with an easy one. And so yes, this one you can factor, but we're going to practice this completing the square by using, or we're going to practice with an easy one so the numbers work out and you can see what completing the square is on a nice easy problem. So we're going to pretend that this doesn't factor. And so what we realize is this 12 is not what we want. And so what we do is we get rid of it. We add 12 to both sides. So that goes away. You're left with 0 is equal to x squared plus 4x. And I'm going to put a little empty space right here. There's nothing there anymore. We're going to put something there here pretty soon. And so what we do is we factor this the way we want to, the easiest way possible. So 1 times something, and all the factors of that something that have to add up to 4. Well, what's the easiest way to add up to 4? 2 and 2. So we factor this, x plus 2 times x plus 2. Well, then we got to think, if that's the way I'm factoring it, this blue part is not the same as this green part. If I FOIL this out, yes, you get x squared plus 4x, but the 2 times the 2 means that this was a 4. Oops, I saw a couple mistakes here, my bad. That's not a 0. 0 plus 12 is 12. Sorry about that. Alright, but I put this 4 here as well. That 4 was not there originally. I did an extra step. I added a plus 4. Well, anything you do to one side, you have to do to the other side. So you have to add that 4 over here. Now we have a total of 16 on the left side. Alright, that was really the hard part. Everything from there is pretty easy. So we forced this to factor. So we actually factored first, and then we went back and fixed that blank spot. Alright, let's continue this. The reason why this is called completing the square is because we can rewrite this as x plus 2 squared equals 16. And if you think from a few videos back, we know how to get rid of a squared. We square root both sides. And so we have x plus 2 is equal to 4. The square and the square root cancel out. But hopefully you also remember that when you do that, your answer has to be positive and it has to be negative. So we have two answers here. X plus 2 is equal to 4 and x plus 2 is equal to negative 4. And then we solve both of these. Hopefully we can do that in our head. If I minus 2 to both sides, this answer is x equals 2. And if we minus 2 to both sides, you get x is equal to negative 6. Now yes, we could have gotten to those answers if we had factored this original one much faster, but that shows us the process for completing the square. I know it looks hard the first time, it gets much easier as you go along. So let's do one that can't be factored. So this one we have no other options. The numbers won't be quite as nice, but it's our only option right now. So remember, this is going to be a 0 right here because we are finding the zeros. This does not factor. The numbers that multiply to be 5 will never give us 8. So the 5 is no good to us, so we get rid of it. Add 5 to both sides. So 0 plus 5 is 5. X squared plus 8x plus, alright, so we are going to put a number right here eventually. Now we're factoring, so 1 times this unknown number is an unknown number, and we want those numbers to add up to be 8. The easiest way to add up to be 8 is 4 and 4, and yes, they do need to be the same. So we're going to factor this as x plus 4 times x plus 4. So if that's the case, what is our mystery number? So 4 times 4, this number here had to be a 16. And you can see I just added that right now. That was not part of the problem, so we also have to add 16 on this side. So that means on the left side we actually have 21. So 21 is equal to, now that we have these two factors being the same, we can rewrite that as a square. X plus 4 squared. To keep simplifying this, now we're ready to get rid of that square root. So let's do that. Get rid of the square by taking the square root. That goes away. So we have x plus 4 is equal to, we've got the square root of 21. Let's figure out what the square root of 21 is. So we've got the square root of 21. Give me a decimal. 4.58. So remember, we got two answers here, 4.58 and negative 4.58 is equal to x plus 4. So now we subtract 4 to both sides. I think we can do that in our head here. That's pretty easy. So if we minus 4, we get just 0.58 left over. So that's our first answer. And when we subtract 4 here, we will have negative 8.58. So you can see our answer is not nearly as nice, but the process was the same. Hopefully you can see why I like to call this force factoring. It didn't factor at first, so we got rid of that number that wasn't working for us, and we make up a new one. But it's weird because you have to go through the problem a little ways before you can figure out what that number was. So you almost skip down a step and then go backwards and fix your work. Alright, let's try one more that has one issue or problem that the others don't have. So slightly harder, but you'll see the process is the same. So this time we have an a value that's not 1. Completing the square does not work if this is not a 1. And so you have to force that to be a 1. So to get rid of it, we divide everything by 3. Remember, this is a 0 over here, and if we divide one side by 3, we divide the other side by 3, and 0 divided by 3 is still just 0. So 3 divided by 3 is 1, so we have our 1x squared. 9 divided by 3 is minus 3x, and 12 divided by 3 is minus 4. So that's the first issue that we took care of. Now that this is a 1, we can go ahead and start trying this problem again. We've got another issue. This number here is not looking like it's going to work out very well. I'm hoping you realize that we usually took this number and cut it in half. It's going to be a little harder to cut this one in half, but we can do it. So let's move the 4 over because we don't want this 4 here anymore. So we get x squared minus 3x plus blank is equal to 4. And then we're going to force this one to factor. So we have a mystery number. What adds up to 3? Well, we're going to do 1.5 and 1.5. Remember, they have to be the same number, and so we have to use decimals here. If you wanted to, fractions also work. If your math teacher wants you to do fractions, you could do 3/2. That would also work. You just take this number and divide it by 2. So if you want to do decimals, you can do 1.5. If you want to do fractions, you can do fractions. I'm going to go ahead and do decimals. Most people like decimals a little bit better. So we're going to do x plus 1.5. Oops, not plus. Minus, minus 1.5. X minus 1.5. So 1.5 times 1.5 will give us this number right here. I'm going to do that on the calculator just in case. 1.5 times 1.5, 2.25. There. But that mystery number is only on one side, so I have to add over here 2.25 on that side. So 4 and 2.25 is 6.25. And now we can write this as a square. And then we square root both sides. Remember, your answer is going to be positive and negative. Oops, I guess I don't need those parentheses on that side. So what is the square root of 6.25? Square root of 6.25 is 2.5. Or, remember we have to have the negative as well. So that is how I'm going to get my two answers, and we should be able to do this in our head. Add 1.5 there, and you get 4. And if we add 1.5 to this one, we get -1. That is a little depressing. Because the numbers worked out so nicely, we probably could have factored this one from the beginning, but that's okay. It gives us a good illustration of some of the ways we can work with these harder ones. So we had to divide the whole thing by 3, so the a value was 1. And then when we had an odd number here, we had to use some decimals in our factoring and our completing the square. All right, so that is completing the square, our third method for solving a quadratic equation. We've got one more to do here in a little bit, but for now I want you to practice completing the square and make sure you've got that down. So here are a few that you can try. Good luck, and hopefully that's making some sense.